computer. All right, we are recording. All right, so I'm going to open Photoshop. Oh, this is fun. This is mechanical system of one of the projects I'm working on. If you've never seen mechanical plant before, it looks pretty crazy. This particular project is the casino I was speaking about. It's in California, and I have to model some of these ducks into our model. So maybe I'll just show you what some of these things are since we just popped open here. So this is a duct that carries air, and that air is either cooled or heated depending on the type of year or the time of year or the season. So these are all, that's what these are, all these like big wiggly shapes are. And then I'm actually not sure, this is maybe a diffuser, or maybe that's where the duct kind of turns up and goes into the ceiling. Ductwork is typically in the ceiling. Sometimes it's in the ceiling above the space that it's servicing. So sometimes there's heating and cooling elements that come through the floor and come up for the spaces they're servicing, but most often they're above. And in this case, there's like a 20-foot ceiling. These ducts are up here, and then there's a drywall ceiling that's I think at 14 feet. So there's a 6-foot space between the drywall and the ceiling, and that's where all these ducts and all these electrical systems live. You can see some of the ceiling paint pattern, and then all these little guys, these little squares. These are all diffusers, I believe. And a diffuser is just where the air comes out of the mechanical system. So if you can think of like these big ducts all up in the ceiling that are carrying conditioned air, either hot or cold, and they have to get into the space. So I don't have a good example in my home, but in like schools or any institutional space, there's like those like squares in the ceiling that usually have openings. They look like the ceiling fan or the fan you might have in a bathroom. And those are all called diffusers. So they're either intaking air or outputting air into the space. And there's all these numbers and sizing of members and all this other information. Anyways, that's not what we're talking about. So I'm in Photoshop. This is what I recommend you guys use for this project. You can use whatever you want, obviously, of course. I'm going to make, let's do a letter size 8.5 by 11. This is how you start a new document if you've never worked in Photoshop before. Hide some of this interface here. Okay, so like I said, I had this idea for Oscar Niemeyer. And so I just pulled a couple pieces, and I'm going to use these 5 images to create a collage. And I had this idea when I first started researching him last night about, oops, sorry. I thought this looked like a hat. I saw this is a cathedral of Brasilia. And I was like, wow, that looks like a really fun hat. And so I had this idea. Actually, let me pull up my sketch here. I had an idea and I made a sketch. So this is a sketch I made. So this was my my concept or my theme for this is it's like a fashion model on the runway. People are asking her like where she got her clothes from. It's like a typical red carpet scene, except the head is of Oscar Niemeyer, and he's wearing his building as a hat and one of his other buildings as a dress. And there's like all the paparazzi and the photographers being like, who are you wearing? Who are you wearing? And he's like, oh, it's like, the Cathedral de Brasilia on my head, and the Brazil Art Museum on my body, and like all these accessories that are couches. So I had the idea to compose all of his architecture onto a garment. So for example, I showed you, or I used the example of a painting. That was one way to kind of conceptualize or frame this collage, and this is another way. So anyways, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop here, and I'll just start dragging these things and dropping them. So the first one, I had this picture of a woman sitting. Her outfit is fairly blank, which is what attracted me to it. So I know I can kind of like Photoshop the things I want around it. It also has a white background, which makes it easy to isolate if I want to put something in the background. So the next thing, I'm gonna Photoshop Oscar's head onto her body because I think that would be funny for one, and two, it gets the architect in there. Okay, so I just put those. So these are on, I have 3 layers right now. So I have the background, which is this white piece, and maybe I'll change the color so we can see a little clearly what's going on. Second layer is the woman sitting. Third layer is Oscar himself. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm just doing that. I'm hitting Z, which is the shortcut for zoom, and then just clicking a couple times. You can see that's also highlighting the magnifying tool, which is on the left side of my screen, but it could be elsewhere for you guys. And then I'm going to go, and I want to essentially cut out his head. So I'm going to use the lasso tool for that, specifically the polygonal, I guess is how you say that, lasso tool. For each of these tools in the toolbar, there's usually a couple tools. For example, there's 3 types of lasso tools. There's the freehand one where you just start clicking and dragging, and you'll see you can make the shape that way. So I could kind of like very carefully trace around his head, and that would work fine. My favorite though is the polygonal lasso tool, which you can see as I'm right clicking. It's the second one here. And that allows me to just click the points I want. This is the one I use all the time. So I'm just clicking around his head. I'll do this a little bit faster than I normally would just for time's sake. I'll get a little bit of his neck in there. I don't want his collar. And then when you get back around to close the shape, you'll see that little, I'm not even sure if you guys can see that, a little circle is popping up next to the lasso tool. So that's how you know you're closing it. So click one more time, and then I have my shape, or I have his head selected. So to cut it out, I'm going to first make sure I have the right layer selected here. So I'm selecting layer Oscar, and then I can either go Control or Command X to cut, or I can go up here to edit and then cut it that way. The problem is that this is an image, and Photoshop automatically kind of like holds the it's treating it as an object. So to get it down to the pixels, I'm going to have to right click and say rasterize. So that will allow me to directly edit this. So I wasn't able to cut it before, but now if I hit Control or Command X, now I'll be able to cut it out. And then I'm going to make a new layer, which you can do by hitting this button down at the very bottom right next to there's a trash can that says delete layer. And then right to the left of that, there's a button that says create a new layer. So I'm going to do that. There's obviously a shortcut for that as well. I'll type Oscar's head. And then I'll say Control V to paste. And now there's his head. I'm going to go ahead and delete the rest of Oscar. And I'm kind of zooming. I love a shortcut. It's Control 0, which gets you to back, like zooms to fit your canvas. I'm sure you can also, there's probably a shortcut or somewhere. Fill screen, fit screen. Fit screen does the same thing. Anyways, so now I'm going to do a little bit of finessing to get his head on here a little bit better. I'm just using some very simple transform tools. I'm loving this already. Speak up, by the way, if you have any questions or want me to repeat a step as well. Okay, there's our friend Oscar. He's looking wonderful. He just got out of the shower. The next thing I want to do is black and white the woman's body. Oscar's head is black and white, so just to make everything kind of match and be a little bit more simplified, I'm going to use something called an adjustment layer. And there's a bunch of these. If you remember, we used levels to adjust a photo of a sketch, and that kind of helped us get rid of that gray cast or whatever yellow cast you're working with if you take a photo of a sketch. So that was an example of one adjustment layer. I'm going to use a different one called hue saturation, which is this little guy right here. So I'm going to click on that. And then it's going to pop open this other window so you can see we have hue, saturation, lightness. I won't go into these two in depth just because we don't have all the time in the world, but I encourage you to kind of play around with these is the best way to figure out what each one does. So for example, if I turn saturation all the way up, it gets really colorful or saturated. If I turn it all the way down, we're gonna get rid of that. So that's good. And then I also want, I think I want to make her a little bit darker. So I'll use another adjustment layer called brightness contrast. Let's turn this brightness down. There we go. So now they're kind of matching a little bit better, which is exciting. Then I also think, well, I'll get to this later if we have time. I might cut out this woman so that we can have the background as like a color or, you know, some other scene. But I'll save that as a last step if we have time. Okay, so we have the makings of something really cool here. And now I'm going to start adding my architecture, or Oscar's architecture to be more specific. So here's our cathedral. Same process as cutting out Oscar's head. I'm just going to use my lasso tool here. This is a pretty simple shape. There's a billion different ways to make selections in Photoshop. This is maybe one of the more simple ones. And I'll show you a different one if I end up cutting out the woman. I'm gonna make sure I get this cross up here. So this again is the polygonal or the polygonal lasso tool. So I'm just clicking around, kind of clicking each vertex. This is great for straight lines. It's not super great for curves. So you can see when I get to this curve part over here, I'm going to have to do much smaller increments to get a more faithful selection of this curve. I'll have to start clicking more frequently. But then obviously when I get to the straightaway, I can do this whole chunk in just one big thing. Here at the bottom. All right, so I want to cut this out, but remember, we just imported it as an image, so Photoshop's treating it as an object still, and we're not able to directly kind of cut and paste, so we have to right-click, say rasterize, and now I can cut, do Command Cut. I'll make a new layer. I use a shortcut because I'm speedy, and now we have the cathedral all cut out. I'm going to place this at a very jaunty angle, I think. Oh, yes. This is, I know this is very silly, but that was kind of the point. I want to show you guys that this is what I'm looking for. I want you to get creative. I want to get weird. Okay, so here's the cathedral. A couple more pieces. Now I want to get in this Brazilian art museum. This is when it clicked for me. So I had, this brings me to one of the many important lessons that I'll try to impart to you over the semester is that sometimes you don't have to have it all at the beginning. So when I first started this, I just saw the cathedral and I knew that that looked like a hat. And then I thought it'd be cool to put it on top of his head as a fashion model, blah, blah, blah. And then when I got to this building, I realized that I had seen several runway shows conducted on this bridge and kind of around this building. So that's when it really clicked for me. I was like, okay, so this is such a good idea. But I guess the point is that, yeah, you don't have to have everything when you first start. Sometimes it's better just to start going and doing and creating something, and then the meaning will come after. Kind of like you don't typically title a paper. Like if you're writing a paper, sometimes it's easier to title it at the end when you've already done all the writing, because you don't know the title before you've written it, or you don't know what you're writing until it's done. So same kind of concept there. Anyways, so my idea, I want to use that, like that pointy, the actual building part is like the bustier, and then I want this like sweeping red shape to be kind of like the train of the dress. So I might actually separate this a little bit. And maybe this is a good opportunity for me to show you another way to select, and that is with the pen tool. So pen tool, it looks like the shortcut is P. And if you use Illustrator, this is exactly the same as that tool. So it allows you to point and click just like the lasso tool, but then you can drag and create these really beautiful curves. Of course, you can also do straight lines with it, but it has that added functionality. So I'll try to use that. I'm honestly not the best at using the pen tool, but for you guys, I will try. So my goal is to kind of isolate this top portion. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, pen tool, P for pen tool. I'm going to start clicking. So I see this curve here. So I'm going to click like near the end of the curve, and I'm dragging before I let go of my mouse. It's kind of hard to see, but that creates a nice curve line there. And then typically what I do is I truncate this curve. So you can see if I click somewhere else, it's continuing that like momentum for the first one, unless I truncate it, which I can do by holding Alt. I'm not sure what it is on Mac, sorry. And then you click on that point you just made, and then I'll truncate the point. So now the next point that I click is devoid of any of the momentum or the curve from the last one. So that allows me to freely kind of space this one out. I'll truncate that one. I'm going to click just for a straight line. And then I might be able to do this in one fell swoop. Maybe I'll do it in two. So I'm going to click halfway, drag, 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 drag. Get that nice curve. And then if I did this right, I should be able to click and almost get that other one. Yeah, pretty close. I think you guys get the idea, so I'll just zoom through the rest of this here. For navigating their canvas, there's also these scroll bars, so you can kind of click and drag more manually that way. All right, and then once you have your shape, you right click and say make selection. This window pops up, ask if you want to feather it. I do not, so I'll hit OK. And then I'm going to copy this instead of cutting it, just in case I need to use that part in a little bit. Make a new layer, paste that. So now the cute little top. And I wish I find, I'm gonna look for a better picture. I want more of like downward looking angle here. I was also doing some more reading, and he is very much a, how do I want to say this? I'll just read this. It says, I'm not distracted to straight lines or straight angles. I like sensual curves. The mountains of my country, the sinuousness of its rivers, the waves of the ocean, the body of the beloved woman, blah, blah, blah. So that further reinforced my concept of kind of like fashion and, you know, putting his head on a woman. What am I looking for? Brazil art. This is a photo that I was just using, but I want something else. This one feels a little bit better. I'm going to go this one. Copy, paste. I'll turn that off for now. Okay, so like I said, this bottom piece is going to become the kind of like swath rest of my dress. And actually, I was just talking to Miriam, and she had a really good question. She said, how much can you kind of edit or distort or warp these images that you are collecting to fit your concept or your theme? And my answer was that as long as it's working towards a concept, I think you can distort it as much as you want. So yeah, get creative. And I think even if it's kind of like unrecognizable from the beginning source images, then that's interesting. using the polygonal lasso tool here because it's quick and I know it really well. So cut this out. Cute. Okay, so I'm gonna do, maybe show you guys a couple of the like warp tools or things like that that Photoshop has. I want to make a little kind of like a corset or something. So I'm going to place this where I want it. Maybe make this a little bit bigger. So I'm going to select only a part of this. So I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool, select this top part. And then I'm going to come up to, image, no, edit. Go over to edit, transform, and then I'm going to go to, again, there's a bunch of these. It's most easy to kind of figure them out if you just play with them and see what each of them does. I think I'm going to go with distort. To be honest, I'm not super, I never remember which ones are which until I just do them. So as you can see, this allows me to kind of like wishy-washy move this all over the place, but it's only working on the part that I selected, which is important. So I'm going to just kind of sculpt this to my needs here. A little more. I'm happy with that. I think I want to see, I think I want to see part of her leg just compositionally coming out. So let me show you how to do a mask. So basically what I want to do, I'll do it really quickly with the erase tool. Oops. This is the eraser tool. I just hit E for eraser. That's the shortcut. I just want to kind of carve out some of this building dress so we can see this leg here. But I want to do it in a way, oops, that we can reverse it. So masks are a great form of non-destructive editing, and non-destructive editing is pretty, it's all in the name. It allows you to do editing, but it's not destructive. So you can always go back to what you had before if you want to. So a mask is one method of that, and that is this little button here down at the right side. It says add a layer mask. So that's going to take your layer. If you look over here at my layers panel, it takes your layer and adds another, well, it adds the mask to it. And what that does is it takes black and white values and converts them to opacity. So maybe I can show you better than I can tell you. So if I paint on this mask with black, it's going to delete, or it's going to hide that image that it's associated with. If I use like a medium gray or something, it's going to do like a 50% opacity, and then a white is full opacity. So it's non-destructive because you're kind of like painting in and out where the image is being shown, and then obviously you can disable it to just like completely go back to square one, or you can enable it. So I'm going to do that same eraser situation, but with a mask, so that I can go back to the beginning if I want to. I'm using my lasso tool purely by instinct here. I just lassoed off a part that I want to show, and then I'm going to take black color, and I just hit B for my paint brush, which is right here, and I'm going to paint that section out. Oops. You can see I went a little too far over here by the foot. So I'll just go back to white, get my brush tool, paint that back in carefully. A great shortcut for making your brush bigger or smaller is these brackets. I don't know, oh, I can't move my keyboard. Oh, maybe I can. These little guys right here that are next to the they're right to the right of the P button. But if I press those, you can make your brush bigger or smaller, which is a really nice shortcut instead of having to go up to here and kind of, like futzing with this size thing. So that's another cool tip. Any questions so far? I know I'm going pretty quickly. Okay, cool. I think I want to continue this red down a little bit further. Just kind of emphasize this train a little bit. So I'm now prioritizing the concept over kind of the authenticity. So I'm adding, this is like not a building, it's not part of Oscar's work, but just to kind of fit my composition here. I'm just doing a little bit of extra. Oh, here's another cool thing. This is great if you're trying to do like hand lettering or something, and it's a smoothing function. So I'm on a brush right now, and there's a setting called smoothing. And if I turn, so you can see with no smoothing, even if I'm just trying to draw like a straight, well, okay, I can draw a straight line, but I can get like really jaggedy edges. But if I turn smoothing on and all the way up, all of a sudden I get these like nice, beautiful curves because it's just following behind where my cursor is. So if you're ever trying to like, write letters or, I don't know, whatever. There's many applications for this tool, but I like it for kind of making nice big swoopy shapes. So I'm going to swoop down over a little bit. Fill this in. Okay, cool. Erase a little bit of this just to get her knee in there. I don't know if that's working. It's kind of a weird angle, but I'm going to keep going anyways. So I have one more piece, and that is a chair that Oscar has designed. So again, for the assignment, this is important to know because Oscar designs architecture, he designs chairs, he's from Brazil. These are all kind of like things that we're learning together and that I'm displaying via this collage. Here's a chair. I'm going to turn it into a bracelet. I'll use a different selection tool than one I've used before, which is called the Magic Wand tool, which is maybe the most iconic or it's like the one you would see in commercials, basically. And it lets you pick a point, and then Photoshop will automatically corroborate how many, or like similar colored pixels. So you can see I clicked in a white area, so it's selecting all of these like white, pixels. And you can also set the tolerance, which means how far away from the original RGB value that Photoshop will search for the selection. So for example, the tolerance is at 10 right now, so it's selecting a pretty good area. I have a hunch if I turn it up to 25, it will probably select all of the kind of like upper half of this image. Yeah, so now it's selecting almost all of it. So now I'm just holding down Shift so that it will add to my current selection. And then I'm going to click, I'm going to click around, adding more colors. But you can see now what's happened, it selected too much. So if I rasterize this and hit delete, I've selected too much. So I think what I'll do is I'll delete most of this with the lasso tool, or sorry, with the magic wand tool, but then I'll go in with my lasso tool and get the rest of this, like the base and the rest of the background out of here. So now we have this cool little shape that started as a chair, but I'm going to turn into a little bracelet. Nice chunky bracelet. Okay, cool. I'm gonna hide some of this as it would be behind her leg here. So let's add another mask. And I'm just gonna use my black paint brush to kind of mask some of that off really quickly. Cool. I'm liking this so far. Like the pop of red. Let's check in with the assignment page just to see which things we can cross off so far. All right, so in this must include list, what do we have so far? Okay, an image of your artist, architect, designer as a scale figure, done. Some element of their name, not done, we'll get to that in a second. Pieces and parts of their work, done. Elements of their design philosophy, yes, right, because we talked about the curves that he likes of a woman and mountains and all that good stuff. Color is obviously a big part of his design. We've included that as well. Compositional quality, check, right? We've got this like cool runway model scene. That's a conceptual, or that's a compositional quality for sure. Other ephemera you find interesting or relevant. Cultural heritage, this is the kind of, there's nothing super outside the realm of design that we've included yet. Finally, your collage must be annotated. Okay, so we're still missing, I would say, this is a big piece and this is a big piece. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop and we are going to work on that. So if you remember in my sketch, this is kind of like a lively scene. There's paparazzi and photographers asking who Oscar is wearing or who the model is wearing. And that's going to fulfill the last requirements. So I'm just going to use my text tool, which is this T over here on the toolbar, horizontal type tool. And then I'm going to click and drag to make a text box. Again, if you've ever used, truly any image editing software, this will be very familiar to you. So I'm going to say, Mr. Meyer, who are you wearing? I could futz with font and whatever for a long time. I will not for today. Okay, check. Okay, so all of a sudden we've fulfilled the name requirement, right? We've incorporated the individual's name, Oscar Niemeyer. I'm going to do another text box. A really quick way to copy and paste something is just with the Move tool selected, which is like the default tool. I'm going to hold down my Alt button. It might be Option on if you're on a Mac or an Apple. And so you can see my cursor turns from just one black arrow to a black arrow with like a little white one. Maybe I'll move over here so you can see it better. So it goes from this like Move tool, but if I hold down Alt, it goes to this copy and move tool. So now if I click on this, I can just boop, make another one, which is really great. This one says Oscar. These are just the text bubbles that will operate as the annotation. So it's both adding to this compositional scene and it's also fulfilling that annotative requirement. And then Oscar is saying, these all things, why? I should have typed this out before. I'm wearing the Cathedral de Porcilia as a hat, the Art Museum dress, and my chair bracelet. This is what happens when you have too much text for your box. It just disappears. And what you can do is just pull this text box so it's bigger, and it will allow you to, whoops, fill your, or fit your text. Everything's spelled wrong. Museum sales address. Okay, so now what I've done is added text that tells the viewer exactly what these pieces I've used are. So if they were interested in Oscar's work, they can go search for Cathedral de Brasilia. They can search for this chair that he's made, and they can find out more. So it's not like, you don't have to like type out the like web address, the URL of where you got this image. You don't have to like MLA cite it. I just want people to be able to kind of get back or reverse search and like find out what some of these pieces are. Dialogue is one way to do it. We've seen a couple more on the assignment page. Okay, so I'm just going to make some quick speech bubbles here. You can also label your layers in Photoshop. I rarely do because I'm lazy, but you probably should for organizational purposes. All right, I'm going to turn my smoothing all the way back up so I can make these nice, pretty curved shapes here, these bubbles. Okay. You can also do this, but there's a elliptical marquee tool and a rectangular marquee tool. So you could also do click and drag, make a little oval, fill that in. Kind of depends on like the style you're going for. Obviously, I would spend more time on this if I was doing it for an assignment, but you get the idea. Okay, so last thing, I do this white background is kind of bumming me out. So I'm gonna use my magic wand tool and see if I can isolate her, our beautiful woman here. I'm just gonna drag her to the top so you can see better what we're working on with. Okay, so you can see the background is white. Unfortunately, her clothes are also white, so I don't know if we'll get very far with this tool. Maybe if I turn tolerance down, that might help. Kind of. Actually, let's mask her, except that's not, yeah, mask. Cool thing about masks is you just invert them. So with my mask selected, I can hit invert, and that's pretty close. And then I'll just use my brush tool to kind of clean some of this other parts up. So you can see part of her chest is missing, so I'll just go in with white instead of black. And since masks are a non-destructive type of editing, you can easily just paint those back in, just like new. All right, cool. So now she is isolated. She doesn't have that white background anymore. I'll drag her back down to under here. Cool. So now if we want, I can make my background, you know, like blue, or put some mountain ranges in there, things like that. Oh, let's talk about one more thing. Let's talk about clipping. So if you remember, we have a couple masks, or sorry, adjustment layers sitting on top of the woman and the background. So if I want just the woman to be black and white, I can do something called clipping. And I'm holding, you can do this by right-clicking on the layer and say, create clipping mask. And so you can see what that did. It just kind of took that layer and it's clipping it, or it's just attaching it only to that one layer. So it's only affecting that one layer. You can also do that by holding down the Alt key or Option on a Mac. And if you kind of mouse between two layers, you can see this like little burp burp icon pop up. So you can click on that. So now we can adjust this background layer freely. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so here's our final image. So let's go back to our assignment page. Make sure we got almost everything here. Image of your artist designer. Yes. Element of their name. Yes, we did. Pieces or parts of their work. Design philosophy. Yes. Compositional quality. Yes. Other ephemera you find interesting, relevant. Kind of. We could do more work on that. And collage must be annotated. It is now. So that is how I would do this assignment. I would use Photoshop and just find like a creative way to kind of like collage together several disparate pieces of information into one like really compelling image. Obviously I did this quickly, so do I think this could be framed better? Yes. My colors are wild. My speech bubbles are all over the place, but hopefully this gives you a good idea about how I would do this project. And I hope that inspires you and helps you in creating yours. Any questions on this? I'm going to stop sharing now.